Well, thanks very much, Susan. Thanks to all of you for being here and to the Vols Teach program for inviting me. I read a little bit about Vols Teach in order to sort of prepare myself to be here, and it sounds like a great program. And I actually have a daughter who's a junior in high school who's interested in becoming a teacher, and definitely going to encourage her to look into this program. So maybe if we get a chance after the talk, I might be able to pick your brains a little bit about what's good about it, and well, I was going to say what's bad about it, but I'm sure there's nothing bad about it. But so anyway, it's
that they'd be willing to say in front of one of us.
Exactly. So, but it's great to be here. I've been to UTK a couple times before, but it's always nice to come back, and it's really an honor to be part of the Noyce Seminar Speaker Series. I'm in very good company. Dr. Andrew Kramer, of course, spoke last month, and next month, I believe, you're going to have Jeannie Scott from the National Center for Science Education, who is sort of a hero of mine. So I feel like I'm in really good company by getting to be part of this series. So I'm really pleased to be here. I know Jeannie Scott, and I've seen her speak several times, and she gives a terrific talk. And so you guys are really going to enjoy her talk next month. I hadn't heard Andrew speak before, and so I went online to the Vols Teach website and watched the video of last month's talk and really enjoyed the talk. But the first thing I noticed when I saw the video was that it was a bald guy with a goatee and glasses. And I thought, wait a minute, did I get something wrong about the theme of this seminar? But then I was thinking about it, and Jeannie most definitely does not have a bald head and a goatee. So, of course, I haven't seen her in about a year, so you know, it goes quickly when it goes. So maybe she's bald now too. But no, the actual topic, my understanding of this seminar series is that the topic is about teaching evolution, and you heard from Dr. Kramer, and you'll hear from Jeannie Scott a lot about some of the issues that face people who are teaching evolution and some of the resistance that they encounter. And so I'm, in the interest of not sort of overwhelming you with that one topic, I'm going to sort of take a different approach with my presentation. What I want to be able to do is maybe a little bit more of a sort of a blue-collar effort to talk specifically about, or introduce you specifically to some resources and some curriculum and some materials that you can actually use to teach evolution. So you're going to hear you heard great things already, and you're going to hear more great things about sort of ways to address the evolution, creationism, intelligent design controversy. But what I want to do is I want to just try to give you a bunch of resources that when you actually are teaching evolution in the classroom, you'll have some things to work with. So that's sort of where I hope to go with this. And I should mention that one of the things that I do in my job is I do a lot of workshops for pre-service and in-service teachers on how to teach evolution. But normally I have 2 to 3 days to do these workshops. And so I try to make them very interactive, and I try to not only introduce content, but introduce activities and lead my audience through the activities that I'm introducing, and have the teachers work on the activities the way they would have their students work on them. Unfortunately, I have an hour today, and I've already spent about 5 minutes of that talking about bald heads and goatees. So I'm not going to be able to do as much of a hands-on thing. Instead, I'm going to do the thing which I always advise teachers to absolutely not do, which is to do a lot of talking and a lot of PowerPoint and a lot of bullet slides. So this is one of those examples of do as I say and not as I do. So, but what I really want to do is just introduce you to a bunch of great resources, and I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you with the intention of making this whole presentation available to you. So all of the links and all of the names of activities and things will be available to you, so that once you're in the classroom and you're teaching, you'll know how to get to all these activities. So also, before I get started, let me just mention I did bring a few resources that I set up here. Most of these are just sort of demo copies. It's the only copy I brought. But if you're interested, and we have time at the end, you can come up and take a look at these, and I'd be happy to chat with you and tell you a little bit more about what each of these things are and why I recommend them. There are some giveaways. So I have these postcards. I have a big stack of them, and everyone can grab one of these. And this tells you about resources that we offer at my center where I work, NESCENT. The National Evolutionary Synthesis Center. So on the back list, a bunch of the activities and resources that we offer. And then I also have postcards for a website that I'm going to mention in my presentation called Understanding Evolution. Has anyone heard of that website before, Understanding Evolution? Okay, so good. I'm glad a lot of you haven't, because that means I get to be the one to introduce you to it. And then also I have a stack of my cards, so I definitely encourage all of you to follow up with me, send me an email, give me a phone call if I can help you in any way with the teaching of evolution. And then the last thing is I do have a sign-up sheet. We have a mailing list every few months or so. We send out an update when we have new resources or new materials that can help teachers teach evolution. So if you're interested in being part of that, you're welcome to sign up. No obligation. We won't spam you, but you're welcome to sign up for that. So, okay, so I got all the business stuff out of the way. I just want to give you a quick mention of where I'm from and what we are. So as Susan said, I work at the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center, and that's a mouthful, so we tend to just call it NESCENT, which is the abbreviation for it. And we are an evolution research center. We're funded by the National Science Foundation. We're about 8 years old now. We're based at Duke University, but we're actually a collaboration of the 3 universities that are all clustered together in central North Carolina in what's called the Research Triangle. And those universities are UNC Chapel Hill, Duke University, and NC State University. And I should just mention, it's not a coincidence that I put UNC on top. I'm a Tar Heel grad, and I live in Chapel Hill, so I had to make sure to sort of put a hierarchy there. So we are based at Duke, but we're really a collaboration of all 3 of those universities. And so my role there is that I'm the Assistant Director for Education and Outreach. Most of our funding at NESCENT supports evolution research, about 90%, a little over 90%. And then that little bit that's left over is me, basically. That's our outreach efforts and our education efforts. And so just really quickly, some of our priorities in outreach and education at NESCENT include improving evolution education and public understanding of evolutionary science, which means that we work both with K through 12 teachers and students and undergraduate instructors, but we also do things for the general public, museum events and things like that. We are very interested in expanding the diversity of evolutionary science, so expanding the representation of traditionally underrepresented groups in evolutionary science. And we also do a lot of professional development for the scientists that are based at our center, the young scientists who are going to become professors and are going to be teaching evolution at universities in the future. They're all experts on evolution, but not so much at teaching. The traditional path that you follow when you get a PhD in biology is that you get an intensive sort of immersion in the science and almost no training whatsoever in how to be an effective teacher and communicator of that science. And so we try to do a lot with our postdocs to help them not only be the excellent scientists that they already are, but to prepare them to be really excellent undergraduate instructors down the road. So, that's a little bit about our center and who we are. And again, I'm happy to answer more questions about that if any of you are curious at the end if we have time. So I like to joke that anytime you're doing any sort of a presentation about evolution education, you are obligated to show this famous quote by the evolutionary biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky. And his famous quote is, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." So I'm curious, how many of you have heard that quote before?
How many have used it?
How many of you used it over and over and over? That's right. It gets a lot of mileage in the evolution education world. So about half of you have heard of it, have heard that quote before, and half of you haven't. It's actually from an article which he published in the American Biology Teacher, which is a journal of the National Association of Biology Teachers. And every February, American Biology Teacher, because Darwin was born in February, every February they sort of dedicate their issue to a lot of topics related to evolution. And so this one is from last month, from this February, and they've actually reprinted that Dobzhansky article, the original article from which that quote came. And I only have my copy here, but I'm going to leave it up here at the table. And if you're interested in flipping through that and taking a look at that article or some of the other articles, you're welcome to do so.
Mine was last February's
Pardon me?
evolution. Mine was last February's evolution.
You had an article on that one?
Yeah, that
Oh,
I showed you.
right. So, yeah, and so those of you who are actually going to go on to become biology teachers, I definitely would recommend that you consider joining NABT, National Association of Biology Teachers. It's a terrific organization. They do a ton of great work to support teaching of all biological sciences, and you also get a subscription to that great journal. So anyway, so about half of you have heard this before, so I'm just sort of curious, what does that mean to you? What do you think that means? Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Does anybody want to be brave and raise their hand and say what that means to them? Nobody wants to be brave. I could call on people too.
You sure?
See, who looks like they least want to be called on? Yeah. Green scarf, you right there.
I went like this.
See, the green scarf, it stands out. It got my attention.
I guess that means that without evolution, there's loopholes, like there's things missing, and when you put biology alongside evolution, things start to make sense.
Okay.
That was a terrible one.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. Anyone else want to add anything to that or say what they think it might mean to them? Why do you think he felt that evolution was so important in understanding the broader context of the biological sciences? You want to?
I'll add my 2 cents. I think that evolution is a large framework which makes connections between whole branches of biology. It really is the unifying framework of the whole field.
Okay. Okay. So, I think that there's sort of a consensus, maybe not 100% of the science community, but I think across a broad swath of the science community, most people would agree that evolution and understanding the principles of evolution as sort of the theoretical underpinning of all of the other biological sciences. You really can't understand, genetics and heredity and ecology and ecosystems, and you could probably extend it to just about every branch of biology, every subdiscipline, without understanding the sort of unifying framework of evolution. That's what he was trying to say, and there's sort of this increasing movement over the last few years that's really started to get some traction, which is to view the biological sciences through this evolutionary perspective, which is to say that we really need to understand the principles of evolution to be able to understand how everything else pulls together in looking at the big picture of biology. So, I think it sort of sets the tone for what I want to do with the rest of my time here, which is to present a bunch of resources to talk more about evolution to your class. As people have been trying more to present biology in an evolutionary framework, what they're doing is, traditionally evolution was often taught as a very sort of self-contained, couple of weeks, often put at the very end of the semester, oftentimes because I think if you do it at the end of the semester, there's a chance that you'll run out of time and you won't have to teach it at all, which is really what some teachers want to do. But increasingly, there's been more of an effort to really thread evolution and evolutionary thinking throughout your discussion of genetics and molecular biology and cell biology and all these other topics. And it's not just with teachers. The AP exams have recently been redesigned, and this year is actually the first year of the new AP curriculum, which has more of an evolutionary perspective. And the MCATs, the Medical Collegiate Aptitude Test, has been restructured to include more of an emphasis on evolution. And there's a strong movement right now to thread evolution throughout the entire medical school curriculum. So in lots of different areas, people are trying to take more of an evolutionary perspective. So with that in mind, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about ways that you can introduce evolution in your classroom. The question is why is it important to address this? Why do we have to have a whole seminar series on teaching evolution? And this is one of the answers right here. So this is from a study that came out last year by the Fordham Institute, where they looked at the state standards for all of the 50 states, and they gave them a letter grade. And these state science standards, it's not based entirely on their coverage of evolution, but evolution was a big area of focus in this study. And not to point a finger at Tennessee, but I'm going to point a finger at Tennessee. You got a D in that. Now, let me just also mention that the state where I'm from, where my kids are going to school, also got a D. So I'm not gloating in any way. I will gloat a little bit that my home state got an A, but trust me, California has plenty of other problems. So the fact that we got an A in science education is sort of notable in that so many other things about the state are falling apart, as you may be able to relate to. But if you look around across the country, there's mostly pretty lousy grades. These grades sort of remind me of my grades as an undergrad, pretty lousy across the board. We can do better, and we should do better. And so this tells us that we need to focus more on really tightening the state standards so that they make a lot of sense and that they convey the right messages about evolution. So just a lot of text. I don't want to sort of read through it point by point, but this just sort of summarizes a little bit about where Tennessee currently is with the state standards. So you're currently working with standards that were adopted in about 6 years ago. And you are actually, so that Fordham Institute study that I just showed you, it mentioned a few states by name, including Tennessee. Tennessee includes evolution only in an elective high school course, not the basic high school biology course. So that's, you know, from an evolutionary perspective, that's pretty bad. Teachers aren't sort of obligated to teach evolution or students aren't going to automatically be exposed to it. But actually, if you look at the state standards for Tennessee, it's maybe not as bad as it seems. Yeah.
I was a biology teacher for a long time,
Uh-huh.
and 2 years ago actually, and it was in our curriculum. Actually, it was on the gateway exam. We had questions on evolution on the gateway exam as well.
So is that something that all students take?
Yes, it was biology, 9th grade biology. It was taught.
Okay. So what I was actually going to point out was that in the state standards, there's a section on biodiversity and change, and it mentions things like looking at natural selection to explain how organisms have changed over time. So concepts that are related to evolution. So if you back up, this quote here about Tennessee was taken straight from that Fordham Institute study. So I was going based on what that study said. But then I actually wanted to follow it up by pointing out that in fact it is mentioned in the standards. This is for the sort of K through 8 standards. And then if you actually look at the freshman biology, the Biology 1 course, it actually uses the E word, talks about summarizing the supporting evidence for the theory of evolution and looking at how evolution contributes to the amount of biodiversity. So a little bit of a mixed message because that Fordham Institute study seemed to be very damning, not just of Tennessee, but of several states. But it does appear in the standards. It was a little unclear to me whether this Bio 1 course is a course that all students are required to take in this state. So maybe not quite as grim as that Fordham report made it out to be. But I actually was going to try to go positive on you guys as well and mention a really important thing, which is that the state of Tennessee is going to be adopting new standards in a couple of years. And those standards, the timing is perfect because it's going to allow Tennessee to be on board with the next gen science standards. Now, do all of you know about that? Is everybody familiar? Okay, so there's a couple of people that don't. So I'll just really briefly mention that historically in this country, really since the beginning of our country, science curriculum standards have been on a state-by-state basis. And this new project, the Next Generation Science Standards Project, is attempting to come up with some national standards. And it's not obligatory at this point, so I think about 35 states have signed on, and Tennessee is one of them, and North Carolina is one of them. And they have a panel of experts, including the National Science Teachers Association and National Academy of Sciences, are all working to develop these national standards that they're calling the Next Gen Science Standards. So these are going to include a heavy emphasis on evolution, and Tennessee is on board, and by the time many of you are in the classroom and teaching, you probably will be working within the framework of these Next Gen standards. So I do see sort of some positive things on the horizon, both for Tennessee and for the country as a whole in terms of these Next Gen standards. So that's sort of the all I wanted to say about the standards. But you know, again, it's something that we could certainly talk more about if you have questions at the end. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to change gears a little bit. And as I said, I'm not going to talk too much about the evolution, creationism debate or spend too much more time on teaching standards. What I want to do now is I want to move forward with this idea that, that many of you, most of you are going to be teaching at some point, high school, middle school perhaps, teaching science, maybe teaching biology classes, and you are going to most likely be teaching evolution at some point, especially with these next-gen standards in place. And what that means is you're potentially going to need access to some resources and some materials and some curricular activities and things like that that will help you to do a more effective job or make your job of teaching evolution maybe a little bit easier. And so I want to try to spend the time that I've left with you just connecting you with a lot of these resources. And so the first thing I'm going to point out is this website, which I mentioned briefly, and these are the postcards that I have up front. So definitely grab one of these if you're interested. Understanding Evolution is a website from the University of California at Berkeley, and it's out of the UCMP, which is the University of California Museum of Paleontology. It's based on a project that was originally funded by the National Science Foundation many years ago to put together sort of a comprehensive overview of evolution. And it's designed for teachers and for students. It's mostly focused on sort of the high school and middle school level. There are definitely some things for elementary school, and increasingly there's more things for undergraduate instructors, but their bread and butter for a long time has really been sort of the high school and middle school teachers and students as their audience. It's what I tell teachers when I do teacher workshops and when I go to teacher conferences is that if you go to just a single website to get resources to teach evolution, this is the one you should go to. Even before you go to our own website where I work, go to this website. It couldn't be, well, I was going to say it couldn't be better. I mean, everything could be better, but it's an outstanding website, an outstanding resource. They've got pretty much everything you need to not only sort of update yourself on areas of evolution where you maybe are lacking a little bit in background, but it's loaded with classroom activities and with explanations that are designed for students and discussion questions and links to all sorts of great resources. So I definitely recommend that you go to this website. Again, you don't need to copy all these things down because I'm going to make this whole presentation available to you. I do want to point out that one of the things that this website has is a section called Evolution 101, which is basically a listing of or links to some of the most basic and most important topics in within the broader spectrum of evolution. And these were really selected because what they did is they looked at the state standards across the country and found the topics that are most consistently represented throughout all of the different state standards. Things like the driving forces of evolution, the mechanisms, microevolution and macroevolution, speciation, which of course can be a very challenging topic in its own right. You know, a little bit of a historical perspective. So they've broken it out based on sort of the most common themes and given you just a general background that's an outstanding background. A lot of you may find yourself in the classroom being asked to teach evolution without having taken a course on it before, and this is going to be a great resource for you. So I highly recommend that you spend a lot of time on the Understanding Evolution website. By the way, if you have questions at any point, just stop me. I'm sort of going quickly because I want to get through a lot of this, but I'm happy to be stopped if you have questions. So this Understanding Evolution website was a big success, but one of the things that some of the feedback that the Understanding Evolution people started getting from the teachers who were using it was, you know, this is great for evolution, but what I'm finding is that my students aren't even ready for this yet. They don't understand sort of the basic concepts of what science is all about, the nature of science, how science is done, you know, critical thinking, things like that. So what the folks at Understanding Evolution did is they got another grant from the National Science Foundation to come up with a new website, which is a companion website, a complementary website called Understanding Science. And I ran out of postcards for that, unfortunately, but just like Understanding Evolution, if you Google Understanding Science, it'll take you right to that site. And this is taking a step back. It's not just focusing on evolution, but it's looking at basically the scientific method and how science is done and why science is done, and trying to help students work through some of these basic misconceptions that are often stumbling blocks before they ever even get to evolution. So this may be where you want to start, actually. Before you get into evolution, before you get into genetics, before you get into cell biology, you may want to just start with understanding science as a good way to get all your students on the same page. So, so understanding science, understanding evolution, two really outstanding resources that I highly recommend. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a bunch of specific activities. Those websites are good general resources, but I want to give you some links to some specific activities that I've used a lot with students. And what I've done is I've sort of identified some of the key areas where student misconception just runs rampant, some of the things that historically students struggle with more than anything. And this is based on feedback I get from high school teachers, but also based on my own experience working with high school students and middle school students. And we're going to start way back. We're going to start with a really basic concept that is just traditionally a really difficult thing for students to wrap their heads around, and that's geologic time or deep time, right? So when we talk about evolution, we're talking about things not happening over tens of years or hundreds of years or thousands of years, but literally millions and millions of years. And students really struggle to wrap their head around that. Not just students, a lot of people. And sometimes I struggle with it too. These are numbers that are so much bigger than anything we can comprehend that it can really trip students up, okay? So I have come across a lot of good activities and resources to help teach geologic time, okay? They've developed a lot of good resources because students struggle with it so much. And one of the first places I'll point you to is the PBS website. So some of you may already be familiar with this, but PBS, Public Broadcasting, has a website. They did a whole special many years ago, a multi-part special on evolution, and they put together this companion website, which is just an outstanding collection of resources. Again, really good resources for teaching evolution, and they have some great. They have over 100 documents and animations and activities, all focusing just on helping students understand these concepts of deep time. So it focuses on lots of different aspects: adaptive radiation, extinction, Earth history, punctuated equilibrium, which I guarantee you, if you're brave enough to try to teach that concept to students, they're going to struggle with it. So these are really good resources to try to introduce them to and help you teach these concepts. So I highly recommend the PBS site as a great site for geologic time stuff. There's some really simple, really easy, sort of cheesy but fun activities that you can do that all sort of help to try to get this idea of deep time across. So there's lots of variations of this. The most common one that I've seen is sometimes they call it the deep time walk. And basically what it is trying to lay out the history of Earth in a single piece of paper. It could be a roll of toilet paper. It could be a big long roll of butcher paper. I've seen people do it by making little signs and planting them in a football field or a soccer field. And what they do is, they have a sign here that represents the beginning of Earth and a sign here that represents current time. And then they put important points in the Earth's history along the way. And what you see, of course, is that most of the things that we think about as history, the origin of life on Earth, origin of, the first humans, whatever, the last time Tennessee won a national championship, whatever. All of these things are clustered within this teeny little section right up at the end. And there's this huge open space here, which represents all of that time. And it sort of gives kids a visual sense of really how deep back time goes. So like I said, there's lots of different versions of them. I just list links to a few of them. You can, like I said, you can do it on toilet paper, you can do it on butcher paper, however you want to do it. You can do it in a gym, you can do it in a football field. It just depends on what variation you want to choose. But lots of different ways, very simple, costs almost nothing to do. A really good way to do it is actually for you not to set it up, but for you to have your students set it up. So you have your students determine what are the key events in history, and they make the little signs, or they roll out the roll of toilet paper or whatever, and then they set this up themselves, and that way they get a much better sense of how this all works. So has anyone here used some version of this in a classroom? Did it work?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So that's sort of a standard, tried and true method. There's a new sort of variation of this, a really cool one. I actually I have a picture of Belize here because I did a similar presentation for high school teachers in Belize, and so I wanted to make it relevant to them. What I probably should have done is switch this with a picture of Tennessee. But imagine this is Tennessee, like rotated 90 degrees or something. But it's a program called Map Time, and basically it takes the same concept of a geologic timeline drawn out with the events marked along the timeline, and it combines that with Google Maps. And so you can literally go in, and it's a free program, anyone can access it, and you put in a starting point and a stopping point. And in this case, you could maybe do Memphis, which is in the western part of the state, and Knoxville, which is about as far east, right, as a big city. And then you can put in those two cities, and it'll fill in that timeline on a visual map for them and show them, that's a way of really hitting close to home with students in Tennessee. And I actually, Tennessee, by the way, is one of my favorite sort of trivia questions, fascinating geography trivia thing that I heard one time, which is that I was reading a thing about, I think it was a campaign for governor or something. It was talking about how hard it is to campaign in Tennessee because it's such a huge state, east to west, and there's so much area to cover. And they said that that us standing here in Knoxville right now, we're maybe you know this, but I was blown away by this. But in Knoxville, we are physically closer to Canada right now than we are to Memphis. Did you guys know that?
It's close.
Isn't that insane? That's what they said in this thing that I read. I don't know, maybe it's wrong, but
It's wrong, but it's close.
because there's a part where Canada really dips down and
500 miles to Windsor, right?
Yeah, it's 8.5 to Canada.
If you go
Oh,
straight
okay.
up, though, you go to Wisconsin, and I'm from Wisconsin.
okay. So maybe it was wrong. But anyway, the point remains, which is that Tennessee is a very wide state, west to east, right? And so it would probably lend itself particularly well to this particular activity. So maybe a fun thing for you to do, and for kids that aren't as excited about unrolling a huge roll of toilet paper, they might have more fun getting online and doing this in a computer lab or something. And then the last thing I want to point out is if you guys aren't familiar with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, HHMI, you definitely should be as future science teachers, because they produce a ton of excellent science education videos, DVDs, movies, literature, posters. And the best thing about HHMI is that it's all free. They will send it to you at no cost to you. They love giving stuff away to teachers. And the person who directs their education efforts now is sort of a world-famous evolutionary biologist, Sean Carroll. And so even though it's called the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, they're doing a ton of great stuff in evolution education because their education director is an evolutionary biologist. And they produced this, this video that just came out last year called The Day the Mesozoic Died. And it's a free 30-minute video that is just a beautiful, beautiful video that talks about the history of how they, talks about the Chicxulub crater, which is the one that they believe, the meteor that they believe was responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs in the Yucatan Peninsula and all that. And great video, high quality, really informative, really well done. And did I mention free? So I definitely would recommend that you go to HHMI's website and get some of these resources for them. A bunch of these things up here are from HHMI, and you can take a look at these as well. So, all right. So deep time or geologic time is one of those topics that is always really difficult for students. Another one is on the surface pretty easy, but there's some subtleties to it. But another important aspect of natural selection is that just about every state standard mentions natural selection. So you saw it in the Tennessee standards I put up there a few minutes ago. So at some point, if you're teaching evolution, you're going to have to teach the basic concepts of natural selection. And HHMI has this wonderful video series. I have a couple of them here. Again, it's free. Did I mention that? Called The Making of the Fittest. Currently they have 4 different videos that all talk about basic concepts of natural selection. They used as an example this pocket mouse. This pointer doesn't work very well, but this pocket mouse video. So when you guys learned about natural selection, how many of you heard about the peppered moths? Do you remember the peppered moths? That's sort of the standard one where there's these moths that were that blended in with the background, but then, and this was in England, and then when the background changed color, the black moths were, I don't even remember, but the black moths were eaten and the white moths survived and that sort of thing. Or maybe it was vice versa. Anyway, it's sort of this vice versa, yeah. Yeah, because the pollution caused the tree trunks to change color, and so the soot, yeah. So So the moths that blended in before now stood out, and so you saw this change in the populations of moths. Anyway, it's the old standard example that people always use, but a lot of teachers don't really like it. One, because students have heard it before, and two, because it's not a truly natural example, because you're talking about things that were anthropogenic, or in other words, due to man-made effects. Whereas this is a truly natural example, and basically the story they tell is that in the desert in northern Mexico and the southern U.S., they have these areas where you see sort of the typical desert terrain, the sort of the yellow sandy background, and then there's areas where there's dried lava flows that are just a dark gray or a black. And they show really good examples of how the light-colored mice survive better and avoid predation on the light-colored backgrounds, and the dark mice survive predation better on the lava flow, the dried lava flow. And so they just explain the genetics of it and the natural selection aspects of it. But it's very visual, very simple, very well explained. So again, if you're looking for resources to help you teach natural selection, sort of the most basic concept of evolution, this is a really good place to start with these HHMI videos.
Do you want to know something interesting? That was the first research project I was involved with.
With the pocket
lava
mice?
beds, yeah.
Oh, okay. Who were you working with?
Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was William Reeder and Iwan, was Frank Iwan.
Great. So if you want to know more about the pocket mice, you can talk to Susan.
But I got introduced to spiders while I was there because I didn't want to stay up all night trapping mice.
Yeah, but the video talks about how they did some really elegant work with not only looking at the basic natural selection aspects of it, but using that to probe deeper into the genetics of it and looking at sort of the genes that affect the colorization, the coat color, and that sort of thing. So, anyway, so a few other. So that's sort of a video example, but there are some really great, really simple hands-on activities. One that we developed is a variation of a really common activity, which is, we call it survival of the Skittles. And basically you take Skittles and you put them on different colored backgrounds, and the ones that match the background, they represent different animals of different colors, and the ones that stand out from the background get eaten, and the ones that blend in don't get eaten. Of course, kids love this because they get to eat Skittles, right? A cheaper way to do it actually is with Fruit Loops. And one thing you can do with Fruit Loops that you can't do with Skittles is if you want to extend the discussion a little bit and talk about sort of cryptic colorization and warning colors, you can take the red Fruit Loops and put a drop of Tabasco sauce on them, and you don't see it, but when the kids eat it, it tastes terrible, and they think it's going to taste really good because it's a red Fruit Loop, but of course it tastes horrible because it's got Tabasco on it. And so then you can, extend it to talk about how certain organisms will, be sort of cryptically colored so that, they avoid predation by basically tasting bad or being poisonous and things like that. So anyway, our version of that is called Survival of the Skittles, and that website there, SALSA is an after-school program we developed at Seeing and Learning Science After School, and we developed this first to teach evolution to students in after-school programs, and there's a bunch of activities there, including that one. Another really common one, some people call it clipboards. Basically, it's this bird beak activity where you take different sizes and shapes of kitchen tongs or various kind of clips and things like that, and you take seeds and nuts or whatever you want to use, and you show how different shapes and sizes of bird beaks correspond to selection and adaptation and those sorts of things. So the link to the Understanding Evolution website has some great activities there. Did you know that, you guys all know teddygrams? Did you know that there's actually two versions of them in every box? There's teddygrams that have their arms up and teddygrams that have their arms down. You guys knew that? How do you know that? You just observant, or? Oh, okay, because I never knew that. They just.
The ones whose arms are up get them broke off too easy.
Oh, okay. In my house, they don't last long enough for us to look at which way their arms are going. But there's some people have put together a teddygram evolution thing where you do natural selection based on the ones with the arms up taste better, or the ones with the arms down taste better, or whatever. But again, if nothing else, you can always appeal to kids with food. And then I also want to mention that there's a bunch of really terrific online natural selection evolution simulations. I've listed them here. I'm not going to go through them individually, but you can get to any of these by following these links, and they're all really good, and they all allow students to sort of explore things like they can change the desirability of particular traits or the frequency of those traits. They can look at how populations change over time, and they can do it all online through these free programs. So really good natural selection simulations online. The last thing I'll mention is that there's a group out of Indiana University called ENSI, and I think it's Evolution and the Nature of Science Institute is what it stands for. And they've got a ton of good activities there as well. So you definitely shouldn't run out of activities to teach natural selection because there's a ton of them out there, and they're really good. Not all of them, but a lot of them are really good. Questions? Yet? Should I keep going? Keep rolling? Okay. All right. Okay, so here's a fun one. And so that's natural selection. Another thing that's often in state standards and students really struggle with a lot is phylogenetics or systematics, which is sort of understanding not only the way organisms are classified, but how those classifications are sort of illustrated using what are called phylogenetic trees. And you've probably seen these. I probably should have thrown in an example, but you've seen these before, these tree of life types of things where it shows the relationships of different organisms. And they're deceptively simple because it looks sort of like a family tree. But students, when they do assessments, they find that students really struggle with interpreting the information in those trees. And so a colleague of mine who's now in Mississippi came up with, Christy Halverson came up with this really simple but kind of fun way to demonstrate some of the basics of phylogenetic trees. And I actually brought some of these as examples. I need these back, but you can sort of take one and pass them around, share them in groups, or just take them and play with them. But basically, you just use pipe cleaners, which are like the cheapest thing on earth. And you can basically build a tree. And the way you do it is you wind them all up at the bottom, and then you pick one color. Any color, doesn't matter. And I'm not very good at doing this and having it look good. Christy's a lot better at it. But you sort of wind it around, and then you go up about another inch and pick another color and wind it around. And you can do it like that. And you just keep going. And eventually, if you're good, if you're better than I am, you get something. Yeah, well, see. She does a better job than I do. But you get something that looks like a tree. Now, it seems like a really simple-minded activity, but you can actually make a couple really important points with something this simple. I mean, for one thing, it gets people using their hands, and it gets kids sort of doing things in a manipulative way, which is always a good thing to do. But the other thing is it allows you to do things like talk about nodes, which is sort of the branching points, and you can point out the nodes in a really physical way. And then a thing that's often very commonly misinterpreted with phylogenies, with these trees, is the idea that if you have a tree like this that shows relationships, that you can rotate it about the node. So if you see how the orange is on your right and the green is on your left, if I rotate it, so now it's the opposite, okay, it's very easy to do that. Students will often think that somehow changes the relationship, but you can show them in a very simple way that these two still share a common node and still have sort of an older node sort of further back in their lineage. So it allows you to make this very simple point about rotating trees about the node and not affecting the relationships. The other thing that you can do that's really nice with this is there's, as you may know, there's lots of different ways to draw trees. So you can do them vertically, you can do them horizontally. You can show that very simply. You can also do them as these sort of square brackets, but you can do them if you want in an angled way. And trees are drawn all different ways, right? And this shows you that you can very simply change the appearance of a tree, but if you follow the lineage back, it's not changing the relationship in any way, no matter how you portray it visually. So anyway, some really simple points that can be made for almost no investment. Here you go, you can play. And it's, it's not going to teach them everything they need to know about phylogenetics, but it's often a really good starting point. Now, I usually follow that up with an activity that I've developed that I don't have time to take you through, so I just have sort of the first slide, which I I at times will call things something like phylogenetic trees, CSI and U, or some variation of that. This is a phylogenetic tree, by the way, in case you were wondering. And what I tried to do with this activity is I tried to explain trees and how they're built with a very, I take them through sort of a very simple process that seems to work really well in showing how trees are constructed. But then I actually use that to give an example of what we call applied evolution, which is how you can use concepts of evolutionary theory to in real world situations. And so what I do is I tell the story, which is a true story, of a doctor in Louisiana who, it's a very twisted story, but he attempted to murder someone. In fact, he was married, but he was having an affair with this nurse that he knew through his work, and she was married to some other man, but they were having this affair, and then she said she was going to leave him, and he threatened, if you leave me, I'm going to kill you. It gets really ugly. But the short version of it is he injected her with HIV-positive blood from one of his AIDS patients and deliberately infected her with HIV as a way to kill her. And this really happened, and I won't tell you all the details now, but the short version of the story is that they actually brought in evolutionary biologists to do phylogenetic analysis of samples of the HIV from this victim and from several of his patients, and used these phylogenetic trees as evidence in court. And the jury, based on phylogenetic trees, convicted this guy of attempted murder. Now, the woman didn't die. She's still HIV positive, but she's still alive. So he wasn't convicted of murder, but he was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. And this, if any of you watch CSI, actually, they based an episode of CSI on this whole story. So this is a really good way to sort of hook students, because when I go around the country, and even I've done workshops in other countries, everywhere I go in the world, people watch CSI. It's amazing how popular that show is. I've actually never watched it myself, but like I was in Belize, as I said, doing a workshop. I asked high school students in Belize. Every kid in the room raised their hand when I asked if they watched CSI. So anyway, so I have this whole activity, PowerPoint, and then there's hands-on activities and classroom activities, and I would be delighted to share the whole thing with you. I don't have time. Normally in my workshop I would take you through the activity, but it's something that I'm happy to share all the resources with you. So if it sounds like it might be something you'd want to do, grab my card, email me, and I'll send you the stuff, and you can hang on to it until you get to that point where you're teaching. I think am I running out of time?
I don't have one.
Okay, a few more minutes. Okay. All right, so one more thing on phylogenetics. This is a really cool activity, and this is called it goes by various names, but it's called the mystery meat activity. And it's an activity that I didn't develop, someone else developed, but is a pretty commonly used one. And again, it involves constructing phylogenetic trees in sort of a forensic application. In this particular case, it has to do with sort of this real-life story of something called Kujira. Anybody know about this? This is so there's all these whaling laws to protect whales from being hunted, but there are one or two types of whales that can be hunted by certain people and sold for meat. And then there's also one loophole where if whales are killed for research purposes, then the meat can be resold, but only in certain markets in Japan. And so the whale meat that's okay to sell and eat is called Kujira. But as it turns out, if you go to a Japanese grocery store and you see things that are marked Kujira, more often than not, it's actually not the whale meat that's okay to serve. It's and okay to hunt. It's sort of illegally hunted, illegally harvested whale meat. And so this, there are some scientists who actually set up a way, but you can't export it. You can't buy Kujira and take it out of the U.S. So some American scientists went to Japan and figured out a way to run PCR reactions in their hotel room, and were able to take samples of whale meat from Japanese grocery stores and actually prove that this really high percentage of Kujira in Japanese markets was illegal whale meat. So they use this as a way of raising awareness for illegal whaling practices. So they've developed this whole excellent case study with this real-world example, and they actually have some nice things so that they sort of tell you the story, and they don't have an actual hands-on lab because obviously in your classroom in Tennessee, it's going to be difficult to get a hold of Japanese whale meat. But they set up sort of a simulated lab where they have these tubes, and your students click on the tube, and the tube will then, it sort of simulates a sequencing reaction, a PCR and sequencing reaction. And through that, you get sequences, and then when they can compare sequences from different samples, and ultimately what you get are these phylogenetic trees based on the samples that they are studying. And it allows them to sort of understand how these phylogenies work, and how these trees work, and how they can be used in sort of this particular forensic application to determine which meat's okay to use and which meat is illegally obtained and that sort of thing. So a fun activity, something you can do easily in one class session, but again, very applied. And so I think that often resonates more with students when you can give them sort of a real world application, even if their real world on a daily basis doesn't involve whale meat. So, okay, and then one last thing, I just want to share this because I think it's really cool. There was a contest a while ago to explain important scientific concepts using stick figures. And as you can imagine, they got some bizarre entries and some really interesting entries. And it wasn't just evolution, it could be any scientific concept. But this is one of the prize winners. And this is amazingly simple and cool, and I love it. And I use it all the time now, which is, it's a really simple way to explain what evolution is and what evolution isn't. And so I think this is a really nice companion piece to some of these activities. So it's a good way to summarize it. So students can relate to this idea of family trees, even if they haven't seen phylogenetic trees before. So this sort of shows you, this is not what a family tree looks like, and you can sort of talk them through, but this is much more what a family tree looks like. They can relate to the idea that here they are, here's their siblings, they have 2 parents, they have 4 grandparents, they have 8 great-grandparents. You know, their cousins are more distantly related than their siblings, but there's common ancestry. All of these concepts that they intuitively know can be explained in a family tree that looks like a phylogenetic tree. And then it's a simple step from that to saying, well, the same concepts hold true for evolution. So evolution is not a fish becoming a salamander, which becomes a cat, which becomes them, right? And this is really important because one of the most common misconceptions about evolution, and one that if you haven't heard it yet, you will definitely hear it, is, anyone?
Humans came from monkeys.
Why did humans come from, did humans really come from monkeys, right? I don't believe in evolution because I didn't come from monkeys, right? You hear it over and over. And of course Darwin never said that. He never said humans came from monkeys, but that's what students often hear or what they often think, right? But what Darwin said is that humans and monkeys have common ancestors. But the idea of common ancestors is sort of difficult to get across to students if you just try to describe it to them. But if you show them a figure like this, I think it's a really simple way to help explain common ancestry as an important concept. So anyway, I kind of like that. I think it's kind of cool. So now I just want to, I have a couple more minutes, I think, and I just want to finish up. Susan had asked me to talk a little bit about case studies for teaching evolution. And so normally what I would do, again, in my workshops, I would actually take you through some case studies. I don't really have time to do that, but I'm sure you've talked about case studies, right, in some education classes, or maybe your teachers use them, maybe your teachers in high school used them. Basically, a case study is a way to present a real-world scenario and teach a lesson through that real-world scenario, to ask students to maybe break up into small groups and have discussions and come up with answers so that the questions that are posed through these real-world scenarios, and then report out and talk about it. It's a way of teaching that really emphasizes critical thinking and emphasizes group work. And some students hate it, but I think most students generally warm up to it after a while. And it's a much more inquiry-based, active learning approach to teaching, which historically was used in med schools and law schools a lot, but is now being used in all different disciplines. Anyway, there are some great case study websites developed just for teaching evolution through case studies. And I'm going to point out 2 of them. One of them is dnadarwin.org. And if you go to this website, you can actually click on this link, case studies, and it will take you to a whole bunch of them that are already developed to teach all of the concepts you're going to need to teach. And so they've done all the work for you. All you have to do is go to that website and access them. Another one was developed by a colleague of mine, Jim Smith at Michigan State University, and he's developed case studies. And what he was trying to do here is to come back full circle to what I started with, which is this idea of nothing in biology making sense except in the light of evolution. So he has evolution case studies, but within those case studies, he's teaching lessons about genetics and inheritance and molecular biology and cell biology and developmental biology, and he introduces aspects of all of those in the context of these evolution case studies. This is a bit of an old screen capture. I think he has more than 4 case studies now. The mouse fur color, that's the pocket mouse example that we talked about, so that's one of them. There's 4 on this page, but I think he actually has developed a few more since then. And again, all of these case study things are totally free and accessible to any of you who want them. And then this slide just lists both of those sites, plus a few others. This National Center for Case Study Teaching and Science is sort of the definitive case study site. Has anybody been to that site before? Okay, so if you like teaching with case studies, this is the place to go. They have case studies for everything, not just evolution. And importantly, they're all they go through peer review, just like a scientific article does. So anything that's on this site has been through some degree of review by people who are teachers and who are scientists, and so you know there are sort of quality activities there. And then just a few other resources for case studies that'll be useful to you.